the seminary that I attended, where I earned my master's and my doctorate degree, is located in Fort Worth, Texas. And just down Seminary Drive from the seminary, there was a large building that was the S&H Green Stamp Redemption Center. Now, I realize by even mentioning that, I have just dated myself, and probably no one under the age of 50 knows anything about green stamps. But what they were back in the day was an incentive to shop at certain places. And if you bought a certain amount of money at a grocery store, if you bought a certain amount of goods at a grocery store, they would give you stamps based on how much you purchased. And you would have a book, and you would take the stamps and place in a book. And when you had so many books filled with stamps, you would take them to this redemption center, and you would hand them your books, and based on what they had published as to how many books it took to get a certain item, you would exchange those for items there that you wanted for your family or at your house. So you actually exchanged these incentive stamps to get something you wanted. That's an interesting idea, because if you take the word redemption back to New Testament days, it is actually a word of commerce. It is a word of exchange. It is a word that was used when someone would take one thing, barter it to get something else. It is also the same word that you would use for ransom. If somebody had been kidnapped and you were being ransomed, or you were being blackmailed to get your loved one back, and you would have to pay a certain amount of money to receive that loved one back, that's that same word, this idea of redemption, the idea of ransom. So as we look at our passage today, and I've entitled the message today, God Redeems, we're looking at this idea of redemption, how one thing is exchanged for another thing. And we understand there's two levels of looking at this. There is the level where Jesus' blood was exchanged for our sins, that Jesus' blood cleansed us from sin, that Jesus' death took away our sin, that he was taken to the redemption center, and we were received out of the redemption center as being saved and guiltless and sinless and holy before God, not because of anything we have ever done, but because of what Jesus did for us. But in our story today, we look at a different application of redemption. In this story of the lost son, there is this understanding of confrontation, of correction in life, how one could be going in one direction and turn and go in a different direction, how one could be escaping home and then return home, and how that then affected the relationships in that family. Not the one who came home, we know that he was accepted and loved by the Father, but the one that did not leave home, and how he saw this and what it caused him to feel. Would he have a relationship with this younger brother that was redemptive? You see, either you can face confrontation, or you can face problems with people by either being redemptive or being critical. You can face it redemptively, or you can face it as an inquisition. You can handle situations at work that might be totally wrong for another person, but you can handle it redemptively, or you can use it to cause an inquisition into that person's life. You see, God always takes the redemptive route, and we see that in this passage today. And this older brother would have to decide whether he was going to accept his younger brother in a redemptive way, or if he was going to criticize that younger brother for ever leaving, and why in the world he was to be accepted back. So we've got three things we'll look at today when we talk about God redeeming. God redeems. First of all, God redeems understanding our reactions. He understands that it's going to be hard for us to accept people as easily as he accepts them. It's going to be hard for us to forgive people as easy as he forgives people. He expects us to. He expects us to accept them. He expects us to forgive them. But he knows it's going to be difficult. So in the midst of his redemption, he does understand our reactions. Notice the father said, after the older brother said that this should have never happened, why did you do this? In fact, if you look at verse 28 through 30 from last week, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." And then notice the reaction from his father, the father being the symbol of God in this relationship. He said, "My son, you are always with me." So he worked through the reactions of this older son to try to now minister to him. He has ministered to the younger son who's come home. He's accepted him. He's forgiven him. He's celebrated with him. They've had a party. But now he turns his attention to the older brother who's feeling like he's been treated in a second-rate way, that he is not left. Well, he didn't leave physically, but we realize he left relationally. But he is not left physically. So, and he's never had anything given for him, no celebration, no party, not a fattened calf, not even an old goat, that he's ever received. And so he's feeling a little left out. So now the father turns to him and seeks to bring him in, affirm him, and love him. So he says, "My son," he treats him with the same relational love and credit that he did his younger son who has come home. "You are always with me," he said. You are ever with me, at all times with me. There's a place that you have been connected to me forever. So you see that God doesn't react to his reaction. The Father doesn't. The symbol of God does not react. So when we react to things around us and we react toward God to that, God always looks through that and sees that in his redemptive work in our lives, and he does not react to our reaction. A friend of mine was the best at what he did, but was never fulfilled because he constantly set up straw people who were getting the attention that he thought he should have gotten. He didn't feel like he was ever respected the way that he should have been respected. Therefore, he not only failed to enjoy his life that to everyone else looked very successful, but it drove him from the profession for which he wanted so desperately to be respected for, to be known for. It not only took him out of the place where he was so good and useful, but it caused him to never be happy with where he was and what he did. You see, redemptive action never gets sidetracked by another person's reactions. In his book, The Return of the Prodigal, Henry Nouwen wrote this. He said, "In his jealousy and bitterness, the elder son can only see that his irresponsible brother is receiving more attention than himself, and concludes that he is the less loved of the two. His father's heart, however, is not divided into more or less. The father's free and spontaneous response to the younger son's return does not involve any comparisons with the elder son. To the contrary, he ardently desires to make his elder son part of the joy that he was also experiencing." When God redeems, he understands our reactions. When God redeems, he affirms our relationship. He said, "My son," his father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." Everything I have is yours. Everything, all that is left, everything about me is actually yours. The younger son did not receive the equivalent of what he had squandered. He was received home. He was accepted as a son. He was part of the family. They celebrated. But all that was left was the older son's. He did not take that which belonged to the older son and give to the younger son, even though the older son seemed to think that because of the joy that he had. All that is yours. In this concept, we see that your brother has had a few minutes of celebration, but you have had a lifetime of relationship with me, he's saying. Now, your attitude is robbing you of the peace of knowing our relationship for all these years. John Ortberg tells the story of a choir of kindergarten children at his church. In this choir, there's a boy with Down syndrome. When usually he listens but does not get involved with the experience of the children. Jenna, the teacher, taught them a psalm based on a statement made by the Apostle Paul and added hand motions to it. The song is, "He who began a good work will never give up on me." And she taught them that he who began a good work, and they would point up, would never give up on me is like safe. Never give up was like safe as an umpire would call a base runner. He who began a good work would never give up on me. And so they were learning, they were saying the song, pointing up, safe. He who began a good work will never give up on me. And on the third time they sang it, the little boy with Down syndrome took his finger and pointed to the sky and said, "He who began a good work will never give up on me." You see, no matter how we feel, no matter what we think, no matter if we feel like we've been cut out, God never cuts us out. God never loves us any less, no matter what we do. God never loves us any less, no matter what he does for other people. He loves us. He never gives up on us. You see, the redemptive action looks to the needs of the person through the fog of emotion. Emotion is there, but reality did not change with the emotion. Nouwen writes, "While the father is truly filled with joy at his younger son's return, he has not forgotten the elder son. He doesn't take his elder son for granted. His joy was so intense that he couldn't wait to start celebrating. But as soon as he became aware of the older son's arrival, he left the party, went out to him, and pleaded with him to join them." In the midst of the celebration with the younger son, he was so concerned about the older son that he left to go to the older son. He wanted the older son to enjoy what was taking place, to have that same joy that they were experiencing. So when God redeems us, he understands our reactions. There's nobody that we can ever have a reaction toward any better than God, positive or negative. God understands. He affirms our relationship in the midst of all that's going on. And then in verse 32, he shows us grace. Grace is an amazing thing. I don't know how we could face life without grace. I have friends of mine who are in a religion that does not talk about grace or mercy. I don't know how you can relate to God. I don't know how you can understand. I don't know how you could include God in your life without grace. Because grace is when he gives us something that we do not deserve, not because of something that we have done, but because of who he is. Notice what it says in verse 32. But we had to celebrate and be glad, he's telling his older son about what they were doing with the younger son, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Next Sunday, on Easter Sunday, we will think about what it means to be dead and alive again, to be lost and to be found. Those of us that are followers of Jesus, those of us that call ourselves Christians, call ourselves believers, every one of us has had a time in our life that we have been lost and then found. We have been dead and then alive spiritually. We have had an experience of God's grace given to us. We have been converted from an old life to a new life. We have been redeemed by the exchange of Christ's sacrifice for our freedom in life. You don't know him unless you've had that transfer sometime in your life. The redemptive power of God through grace comes when we are converted from one thing to another. That we come home, that we've been out to the far country, that we've been away, that we've tried to do it on our own, and we've realized we can't do it on our own. We can't create that which is impossible for us to create. We just have to come home and rest in him and rely on him and believe in him and commit to him. And grace then flows to us because of that. The movie A Wonderful Mind chronicles the life of John Nash. It begins when this brilliant young man from West Virginia enrolls at MIT. It follows his life from renowned professor through severe paranoia. I think he actually enrolled in Princeton, and follows his life from renowned genius to professor, those severe paranoid delusions to form a self-controlled discipline that allowed him to compensate for the visual, audio delusions never ceased. He saw things that just followed him, saw things that caused him such anguish. These mental issues that he dealt with in this brilliant mind always haunted him until he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work on the dynamics of human conflicts, which revolutionized the theory of economics. At one point in the film, he makes the following statement to a friend. Interesting statement. He says, "I'm not so different from you. We all hear voices. We just have to decide which ones we're going to listen to." We all hear voices. We all hear voices telling us to do this or believe this or don't believe this or follow this or not follow that. We have to decide which voice we listen to. Are we going to listen to the voice that's reaching out to us and saying, come home, come home? Or are we going to listen to the voice that seems to always cause anguish and destruction and insecurity in our life? We hear both voices. Both voices are there. Which one will we be willing to listen to? Which one is telling us that we're loved? Which one is telling us that we're valued? Which one is telling us that they want to celebrate our return? That seems like the voice that I want to respond to. You see, redemptive action respects the various relationships involved without ignoring obvious affirmations. You see the conclusion of the picture? The picture's being shown there. And you see the joy of the Father is flooding all other emotions. And if the brother is shown, and there's some controversy as to whether Rembrandt put the brother in or not, or whether he was the one back in the shadows or he was the one up front. But if he is shown, we'll see that the brother at this point was less like the father. That his hands and his posture and expression were not like the father's expression. If he is not in the picture, then Rembrandt was saying, did he ever confess the sin of leaving? Did he ever get over his bitterness? Was he ever restored? My hope is that he was. You see, as Nowin says, here lies hidden the great call of conversion. Look not with the eyes of my own low self-esteem, but with the eyes of God's love. As long as I keep looking at God as a landowner, as a father who wants to get the most out of me for the least cost, I cannot but become jealous, bitter, and resentful toward my fellow workers or my brothers and sisters. But if I am able to look at the world with the eyes of God's love and discover that God's vision is not that of a stereotypical landowner or patriarch, but rather that of an all-giving and forgiving Father who does not measure out his love to his children according to how well they behave, then I quickly see that my only true response, that my only true voice to listen to can be deep gratitude and thanksgiving. Do we see God as a punishing parent? Do we see God as a landowner deciding whether to let us have part of the land? Or do we see God as one who is urging us to come home and to celebrate and to be forgiven? I respond better to the latter. The immediate lesson is this: the Father understood that the positive actions applied to one son by no means should detract from the other son. And the ultimate lesson is this: God treats us all the same in different ways. We learn to trust his decisions and activity because he is always fair and his actions are always employed for redemptive purposes. And finally, experiencing the love of our redemptive Father is dependent on us taking our attention off ourselves and focusing our eyes on him. When this occurs, petty jealousies dissolve. There's no picture that is any better descriptive of what we've been talking about than that which we call the Lord's Supper or communion. Because in observing this great ordinance of the church, we are remembering again that Jesus died for us, that his blood was spilled for us. And the reason that that happened was so that we could be redeemed, so that we could be exchanged for new, so that we could come home to the Father. So as we enter into this time of reflection and memory, I want you at your house to get your bread and place it in front of you.